I'm Hillary Hayden. I'm the organizing director for the Trade Justice Ed Fund, and we are a national organization working to stop the damage of corporate-centered trade deals and promote a positive vision for international trade. These calls, as most of you know, where we share updates about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is known by the acronym IPEF, have typically happened every third Thursday at this time. So this is a weird time for us, but that's okay. I want to flag for folks quickly that these are not intended as press briefings. So if we have any members of the press listening in, please feel free to reach out to me separately. This is not the place for press questions. So in terms of an agenda today, I'm going to give a quick set of updates on the IPEF campaign and a couple of victories in the digital space. After that, we're going to get an overview of some powerful APEC organizing that's happened over the course of this year and a little update from the San Francisco space. And then, of course, we'll close out with some action steps for the next few weeks. I do want to flag that we will have some time for questions after the IPEF and digital updates. So go ahead and put questions in the chat and we'll try to address those. I think we're going to jump in then with IPEF campaign updates. So like I said, I want to thank folks for meeting at this weird time. As you know, we decided to postpone our regular call on the third Thursday of November because there was so much going on with the IPEF negotiations in San Francisco and everything was really live and moving yet at that point. There's a lot of updates. I want to give a quick reminder that our priorities over the course of the IPEF campaign had been in kind of three buckets, right? We have a labor rights bucket, we have an environmental bucket, and we have a so-called digital trade bucket. And thanks to decades really of previous advocacy and activism from folks on this call and millions of others, we knew going into the IPEF negotiations that we had already won certain battles. One of those battles is that IPEF was not going to have tariff cuts that made it easier to ship manufacturing jobs overseas. So that's one. It was not going to have any of the intellectual property rules that help big pharma jack up medicine prices. It was not going to have a procurement chapter that bans things like Buy America or Buy Local or Buy Green government purchasing preferences. And it wasn't going to have any of the investor-state dispute settlement rules that allow transnational corporations to attack environmental laws and other kinds of public interest policies. So those were wins that we made even before the IPEF talks started due to earlier campaigning. But just because we started with that progress didn't necessarily mean that what was going to be in IPEF would automatically be a good thing. We knew we had to stop big tech's demands for digital trade provisions. And we also had our own proactive agenda that we were pushing to make sure that any new trade deal helped enforce labor rights and environmental standards across borders. So with those priorities in mind, I want to talk about the things that have happened since our last meeting. There was a long IPEF ministerial in San Francisco at the beginning of November that led directly into the APEC heads of state meeting with President Biden and other world leaders from all over the Pacific Rim. And they hoped that in that space, they were going to have an IPEF signing ceremony, that they would have a cool press briefing all together to do the signing. And I'm happy to report in this space that that signing ceremony did not happen in San Francisco. The Commerce Department on its own did sign the IPEF Pillar 2 deal on supply chains that was announced back in May. They also announced a substantial conclusion of Pillars 3 and 4, which are the energy and anti-corruption deals, but they still haven't released any text from those deals. Those three pillars, I think, could have been meaningful and substantive, but what we've seen from the supply chain text and what we've heard about Pillars 3 and 4 is that the main things that they really do is set up committees for people to talk about issues going forward. They do not set up binding rules to govern the global economy that countries are going to be obligated to follow. Those binding rules were supposed to be part of IPEF's Pillar 1, the trade pillar, which is a much longer, more detailed legal agreement. And that deal was not signed in San Francisco, nor was it announced substantially concluded. The Biden administration didn't sign the IPEF deal because it didn't go far enough on labor and environmental terms. The straw that broke the camel's back on that and convinced President Biden not to move forward with IPEF was when some Democratic senators were talking, Sherrod Brown from Ohio, and we're talking Ron Wyden from Oregon, and probably a handful of others, although those two have been the most vocal, so that they would oppose IPEF if it did not do better on labor standards in particular. So I want to note that all the advocacy we've done this year, contacting the administration, reaching out to members of Congress, and shining a big spotlight on this deal, helped set the context in which the administration heard those senators' complaints that voters care about labor standards and trade deals, and convinced those senators to speak out on the issue in the first place. So as you'll recall from this fall, our message has been, do not move forward with an early harvest on any of IPEF's trade pillar without an agreement on strong labor and environmental terms in place first. And I'm happy to say that that's exactly what we got. They've punted on this deal, saying that they need more time to work on the labor and the environment pieces of it. I do want to say for folks here that it's not necessarily over. Negotiators are meeting this month to figure out a negotiating schedule going forward. I think before the end of the year, we'll have a pretty good idea of what that's going to look like. But my guess is that the U.S. is going to want to slow walk IPEF talks throughout the course of 2024, at least until after the election, unless countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, Brunei, and a handful of others have a big change in direction in terms of accepting strong labor and environmental terms. So all that's to say, the IPEF trade pillar is not officially dead, but we're hoping that with some monitoring and advocacy next year, we can prevent it from moving forward for the time being, which is good news. The even better news that I want to share with folks since our last meeting is on digital trade. So in early November, the Office of the U.S. Trade Rep officially announced that it was withdrawing U.S. support for 4 specific Trump-era digital trade proposals at the WTO that had been demanded by big tech. 2 of those proposals that the U.S. no longer supports were about ensuring companies' ability to ship, process, and store people's personal data anywhere they wanted, something that would have undermined privacy and data security, but also would have rapidly accelerated the offshoring of service sector jobs that rely on data. One of those proposals would have established new algorithm and source code secrecy guarantees, which would have undermined AI oversight and accountability, including reviews of AI-aided hiring and bossware for labor law violations and for racial and gender discrimination. That final proposal, the 4th one, would have undermined the anti-monopoly policy and other regulations that affect big companies, the big tech companies, more than smaller ones, which would have helped firms like Amazon, Google, Uber, and other digital platform type companies get even stronger. So this is a pretty big change in U.S. policy, and it would not have happened without the demands of all of the civil society folks that have been active on this over the last year. We're talking folks in the consumer space, we're talking labor, civil rights groups, faith, family farm movements, etc. I should point out that USTR officials said after the WTO announcement that the reason they were changing the U.S. position was to better align it with changes to the digital trade approach that they were taking in IPEF, which signals both that those changes have been made in the IPEF space and that it was IPEF campaigning specifically that led to these huge wins. So I want to give a big clap and shout out to folks here that testified, that reached out to members of Congress. And I know folks will watch, some folks will be watching this later. So thank you to folks who did big digital advocacy this year. As monumental as this digital trade win is, we went up against big tech's army of lobbyists, millions and millions of dollars in lobbying money. And we won, right? But as important as this victory is, it's still pretty tenuous. Not only is big tech, the Chamber of Commerce, and other corporate lobby groups engaged in a counterattack trying to undermine the USTR for changing this position on digital trade, but there's actually a lot of members of Congress, including some Democrats and some part of the administration itself, that are pretty closely aligned with the tech sector that are also pushing back. So a House letter led by one of my favorite, that's a little sarcasm, favorite Washington rep, Susan DelBene, went in with 38 signers. And a Senate letter that was led by Senator Wyden in Oregon went in with 32 signers, both attacking the administration's digital trade pivot. There have been articles about folks like Kurt Campbell at the State Department, who was one of the big boosters of the TPP back in the day, trying to wrestle digital trade policy making away from USTR to put it into hands of other agencies within the administration. I think the bottom line here is that we have more work to do if we're going to defend and secure these digital trade victories. And a little later in the call, my colleague Clayton is going to tell you one way that you can help with that. I said this already, but I just want to reiterate a big thanks. People have told us that we were not going to win on big tech's digital trade demands. They said that we would never stop IPEF, stop a deal getting signed at the APEC heads of state meeting in San Francisco. everybody in this space and folks that are watching later, like everyone here has played a big part in proving those people wrong. And more importantly, we've scored some really important wins this year for workers, for consumers, for civil rights, and more. The listening sessions, the APEC work, the postcarding and phone calls, all the social media posts and petition work and presentations that folks have done is making a difference. So again, I just want to say thank you for all of that and congratulations to folks in this space who made those victories possible this year. I'm gonna pause there. Does anybody have any questions about the digital trade stuff or the IPEF campaign? All right, see. Oh, go ahead, Carl.
Yes, I do. I think that in the announcement on IPEF that it was announced that Catherine Tai, the U.S. Trade Representative, will be continuing the negotiations on Pillar 1, and that they expected to conclude that in a year. Is that supposed to be timed with the new APEC, the next year's APEC summit? And I think that's going to be in Peru, or?
So that is a great question. I think that they will try to draw the negotiations out, and then over the course of the next year, I think a lot of that has to do with the optics of signing a trade deal in an election year. I don't know if they're going to be trying to time it with a heads of state meeting. I think I referenced this earlier, but they're supposed to be coming out with a schedule very soon, announcing specific negotiating rounds and locations and that kind of thing. So we should know before the end of the year what that timeline is going to look like, but we don't have the details yet.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yes. Is there any way that we can have like binding rules for human rights rules? How can we, for us, a human rights activist, for the other side of the deals, how can we how can we introduce like binding rules regarding human rights, on those countries that these big companies are doing business with? Because in addition to those big companies getting rich, it takes them doing business with autocrats, on the other side of the fence, who can keep their wages low and who get rich through these business deals. So with nothing, binding them on the human rights side, they're still able to bypass us, depending on the year when we have a president that's pro-business or pro-labor.
Yeah, so I think the concern that you share is one that the trade justice movement has been working on basically since NAFTA, right? The introduction of good labor and good human rights related provisions. I think virtually every letter that trade justice has sent into the administration has called for human rights standards and has called for labor rights standards in our trade deals. I think the pressure on the USTR to figure out how to make those binding is going to be an ongoing process. For right now, we haven't even really been able to get binding labor standards in a trade deal at all. The closest that we've come is the USMCA, like facility specific enforcement, where they would be able to go into a specific facility where they found a violation. But I think the ongoing question that you're asking about how do we get this in future deals is one that we're also going to be doing advocacy on. I think we just have to be able to keep pushing the administration, right? Yeah. Go ahead. Oh, okay. Any other questions? Cool. Okay, so I'm going to hand it off then to Julie Buwana from the Washington Fair Trade Coalition, who's going to highlight some of this year's cool APEC work. Julie, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Hillary. Let me share my screen. Yeah, so thank you all for being here today. Super excited to talk about some of our APEC activities this year, and how, all the folks here on this call were able to help us really achieve the wins that Hillary kind of talked about. So just as a quick refresher, APEC was the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, which met in the US this year throughout the country, starting in February and ending in the Heads of State meeting in November. And so wherever negotiators went, we followed, and we put a lot of pressure on them. And, with the help of trade activists throughout the country, we got some really great wins. So getting into it now, just quickly, some goals and objectives. I think Hillary kind of touched on this a lot. But going into this year, we wanted to make sure to use APEC as a way to defeat an IPEF that didn't include strong labor, environmental, and consumer privacy enforcement, raise awareness and educate folks about IPEF, and put pressure on USTR and the Biden administration. And a bit of a spoiler alert, we actually were able to hit each of these goals. So that's really impressive. So we're going to now kind of go into each APEC ministerial and kind of talk about, what we did and what we were able to accomplish. So the first APEC ministerial was in February in Palm Springs, California. And basically this consisted of a demonstration outside of the actual APEC ministerial. Again, this was kind of the first one. There wasn't a lot of talk about APEC yet, but we kind of used it as a launching pad for the rest of our APEC activities in the year. It was really great building community. There was great activists and labor folks, and we were able to kind of build a bridge between labor and other activist groups. So that was kind of the first ministerial. And then the next one was in Detroit, Michigan in May of this year. So this consisted of some educational workshops, a town hall with reps Dingle, Tlaib, and Thanedar, as well as a march. It contributed to our larger goals and objectives in that we actually got members of Congress on the record about IPEF and digital trade. We also had UAW kind of show up and really support, which was really incredible. Obviously, we were in Detroit, and that was really helpful in really pressuring the administration. So yeah, it was a great time to connect and really bring our demands right to the negotiating venue and right to the negotiators' doorstep. So that was really great. The next APEC ministerial was in Seattle, which is where the Washington Fair Trade Coalition is based in, and this was in August. So what we did here is actually a little bit earlier. In May, we did a speakers tour where we went around different cities in the Pacific Northwest and Oregon and Washington, and kind of really hyped people up ahead of APEC. Talked to people about IPEF and APEC and what was going to happen. We had, once the negotiators were in town, we met them right away. That first weekend they were in town. We held a very big, large-scale teach-in. We had a specific IPEF workshop there. And then we had a big march the next day. Lots of folks showed out, and we were able to deliver a petition signed by thousands of people, outlining our demands for IPEF. We also did a climate letter delivery, and we had a webinar on digital trade and big tech with lots of experts, including Representative Pramila Jayapal. So, this was really great. We had lots of amazing events. We were definitely able to elevate IPEF. You can kind of see in these different banners at the march that IPEF was really a big part along with APEC. And so, we were really able to raise awareness about IPEF. We got a lot of great feedback on our IPEF webinar. And so within the labor and activist spaces, we were definitely able to elevate that. We also were able to raise awareness about digital trade and get folks on the record when it came to our webinar. So that was really great as well. And then, as we mentioned, and as Hillary talked about, the last APEC meeting was the heads of state meeting in San Francisco, and that was just last month. So this, consisted of a trade and climate educational webinar, a banner drop, trade workshops as part of a large-scale teach-in again, and then a march. This was really impressive. I mean, there were thousands and thousands of people who attended the march. There were lots of different events, and it was really an amazing culmination of APEC. This was right where trade ministers and heads of states were, and there was a lot of pressure from a lot of different groups. I mean, it was literally international. There were people that were there from Mexico and other countries. So, it was really a great opportunity to bring a lot of different organizations together in many different issue areas. And then again, at the end of the day, the pressure was enough because they weren't able to sign the completed IPEF. So that was really great. And that was our APEC activities this year. Again, just kind of wanted to echo Hillary that the wins that we accomplished could not have been achieved without everyone on this call. All of you who were able to attend an APEC event, either in person or virtually, or shared our events on listservs or social media, signed petitions and letters that were delivered to negotiators at these events, attending these meetings and asking questions, and then taking what we talked about and talking to friends and family about trade justice. All of these things really made our campaign this year successful. So again, a big thank you to all of you who made this year's APEC and IPEF campaigns possible and extremely successful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. Julie gave a very similar presentation on our staff strategic planning, which we held on the sidelines of the San Francisco stuff in Carl's office. Thank you, Carl, for letting us use your office. And I still love all the little city graphics. I loved them then and I love them today. So thank you, Julie. Clayton, do you want to share some action steps with us that folks can take on specifically on digital, right?
Yeah, sure thing. So howdy, y'all. My name's Clayton. I am the trade associate or the program associate with Trade Justice. I want to echo congratulations to everyone here for the amazing work that y'all have done this year in stopping big tech's digital trade agenda. Now, I'm going to talk about a few easy ways that y'all can be sure to submit the digital trade work over the coming weeks. As Hillary has mentioned, since the announcement has come out, some members of Congress, members of the administration, and business community members have been pushing back on this. So we got to make sure that in this moment that members of Congress are hearing from their constituents, they're hearing from us, about how important it is that they back the administration on this publicly. We put together a tool that will help folks reach out to your members of Congress to share an important op-ed and urge them to publicly back the administration's decision to pull the digital text from the WTO and in IPEF, which I'll share in the chat in about 5 seconds. So with this tool, you will very, very easily be able to find your member of Congress. Basically, all you need to do is just put your name and your address. It'll do the rest of the work for you. It'll tell you who you can all write letters to. You fill out a little bit of extra information, just depending on who exactly you're writing the letter to. You click send, and it's easy peasy. It takes probably like 2 minutes at the most. So we really encourage y'all to please, first off, send a letter to your members of Congress, Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever, in both chambers, so they all hear from us. and then share it with a few friends, 5 to 10 people you know, post it on social media, anything and everything you can do to get people to know about this from across the nation. Every little bit is going to help with this. Now, if we have folks from Washington or Oregon, we have a few very specific things for y'all. So Senator Wyden, who is from Oregon, he chairs the Senate Finance Committee, and Rep. Del Bene, who is on the House Ways and Means Committee and chairs the Digital Trade Caucus, have been both vocally critical of the digital trade policy reversal, and we don't like that. So they're going to need to hear from folks within their constituencies. So if you are from Oregon or you know anyone from Oregon, we ask that you please sign or share this. Again, you will need to be in Oregon, but if you are or you know any people in Oregon, we really encourage you to send this to them so that they can fill it out and make sure Senator Wyden knows that they need to back the administration on this. This is super important. Next, we have one for Representative Del Bene. They represent the 1st District, if I remember correctly, of Washington, that's around the Seattle area. So if you know folks in Washington's 1st District, or even if they're honestly close, to send it to them, try to have them fill it out, and so that Del Bene can hear from folks within her district. So those are the really big 3 things coming up. So again, if you know any folks in Oregon, please share that Wyden letter. It can be anywhere in Oregon. For folks who are in around the Seattle-ish area and Washington's 1st District, please share the Del Bene thing. And anyone inside the United States can get the very first thing that I shared about the digital trade, the support U.S. withdrawal from digital trade giveaways for big tech, that very first part. And we'll also try to send all these links in an email to make it super convenient for you all. So just in case any of y'all are on the phone, should make things easy peasy. And Hillary, back to you.
Awesome. We're going to be doing a lot more over the course of the next couple of months to kind of shore up these victories and make sure that we don't get rolled basically on the amazing work that we've done over the last year. I have one housekeeping note for folks. Technically 2. I will, like Clayton said, send out a follow-up email tomorrow with a recording of this call, all the links that folks can share and that kind of thing. My second housekeeping note is that in January, we're going to be continuing to host these calls under a new name, which I think that the Trade Justice staff settled on Trade Justice Power Hour. So I'm really excited to restart in January. And I think the thing to say is they're going to be focusing on a lot more broad trade justice education and what we can do to impact it in a super important year, where there's, as we all know, next year there will be lots of different trade policy proposals flying around from various candidates and that kind of thing. So we're going to be talking about a whole host of different kinds of educational issues. There will be a little bit of IPEF campaign stuff sprinkled in as there are opportunities to talk about it and opportunities to influence those negotiations. Folks here have ideas, things that you're really interested in, things that it would be fun to do one of those educational hours on. I would love to hear those ideas. I am going to include, please respond to me with topics that you care about, that we should think about doing something on next year in that follow-up email. So I think with that, I hope everyone has an amazing holiday season, hanging out with friends and family or whatever, however you prefer to spend it. And I look forward to seeing folks in January for our first Trade Justice Power Hour. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for all the hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.